this is a video I planned ages ago and kept putting off solely because it just seemed like something impossible to piece together. So for context, this is Sir Fluff. They're a YouTuber that has done animation memes for over 8 years now, and whom you may recognize from this guy if you're at all a fan of animation memes between 2017 and 2020. And because of that, there are well over 170 animations to go through. There's a Toy House page with more information, I think there's a comic, but I just want you to understand the pain I had to go through for some of this, because when a person works on something for over 8 years, and you look through it after all of that time, there are bound to be pieces of information that later isn't canon or contradicts things, and you just don't know. There are several pieces of information I didn't know up until them being explicitly told to me after they allegedly happened via a random description here or a pinned comment there, or just told through a Toy House page. Actually, there's a lot of characters that only exist on Toy House, and have never even shown up in the animations, while other characters show up in the animations quite a few times, but have just not had their Chekhov's gun yet. What I'm trying to say here is, if there's something that I missed or that I got wrong, you're not allowed to break into my house in the middle of the night to tell me that I didn't check the pinned comment on this post on a defunct website that says how many kickflips each of the characters can canonically do back to back, okay? I tried my best here. As a base idea for those uninitiated though, LOTL Corp is a series following Chiffon, an axolotl born tiny as they inherited a medical company from their rich father that they brought into greatness, with everyone unaware of the horribly unethical experiments going on in the inside. The only one aware of Chiffon's lack of moral compass being Latte, his emo brother, who's harboring revenge after Chiffon is suspected to have been involved in some way with an accident that killed their other sibling Muffin. Now I usually will go in chronological order of the animations like with Pochi or Hosalt, but with this series there are two primary stories that get bounced back and forth a lot, that being the family plot with Chiffon, Muffin, and Latte, as well as the experiment side of things with LOTL Corp. So to make sure that I can cohesively tie together a story, I'll be starting with the family story in its chronological order before moving to the LOTL Corp stuff, skipping any animations that are just animation memes and don't really give us new information, as well as skipping shitposting as they're non-canon, and just focusing on the lore as we get it, maybe supplementing it with a Toy House thing where the animations don't. So with that being said, let's talk about Chiffon and Friends. Just to right away get the names in your head since I'll be saying them a lot, this is Muffin, this is Latte, and this is Chiffon, alright? Muffin, Latte, Chiffon. Coma boy, emo boy, murder boy. I think the best one to start us on here is Epoch, even though it's not directly the first family video because Sir Fluff directly explains the video in the description, which is basically a more descriptive version of what I just said earlier. The main character, emo-looking one, is Latte, Chiffon's second brother. Before Chiffon was born, Muffin, the first brother, and Latte was closer than ever, since they don't have a mom and their dad was always busy. Some years later, the accident happened. Latte felt guilty even though he had nothing to do with it. He also felt useless because he knows Chiffon has something to do with it, since he's the only one that knows Chiffon is a psychopath, but cannot arrest him over nothing since he is a cop, and beating up somebody, especially if that somebody is your brother and the son of a big company owner, is a huge crime. In the video, we see a handful of direct details as well, as Latte drops this family photo that will appear in the future, which has the writing, "Don't fuck this up again." Not long after, we see Latte discovering what happened to Muffin, which as you can see here, he got into some kind of car crash with the deer through the front. Although it looks like that crashed through the back through the way that it's drawn in this specific video, we can clearly see in the next shot the deer through the window goring the driver, as well as the wheel here, so no conspiracy there. We also see this more obviously in future videos, specifically Alarm Call, but we'll talk about that later. Due to this incident, Muffin is in a coma in the hospital, and we get this shot of Chiffon that makes it pretty clear that there is something shady with this. But there's obviously a lot of questions, like how did they do it, and why? Going to the next short though, we have a look at Muffin in the flesh in the short Fantasize, which actually came before Epoch, but I thought it'd be a little bit confusing without the other, mainly due to all of the imagery reminiscent to his coma and parallels to death, such as on the line "I'll fly up to paradise," having Muffin holding up a deer head to his chest with the horns coming out of the back as wings. We also get another image which is likely the one that Chiffon had in the last video due to the fact that it's covered in blood, that being of Muffin holding Chiffon on the first day of his birth, especially as the blood matches up all being on one side, splattering it. And again, these videos are back to back. The next video, Monster, doesn't have a massive amount of new information. It's just some of Chiffon taunting Latte, who is trying to piece everything together and prove Chiffon was involved, though something that did catch my eye was this conspiracy board. Now the main shot isn't very legible, but this zoomed in shot does give us a little bit of info. See, the big thing that we know is that Chiffon is involved in some way, but we don't exactly know why Latte thinks that. We just know it from Chiffon's behaviors. However, in this zoomed in bit of the conspiracy board, we can see this family photo that was seen in Epoch, only now it's without the text text, as we would have seen part of the "don't fuck it up" text around like the right side of it. A bunch of stuff is cut off, but from what we can see is how a newspaper that reads LOTL CORP Hubson's third son get the business, which if we cross-check with the toy house, we know that Hubson is indeed all three of their fathers. And lastly, this part that's especially hard to read from the cut-off letters: C-O-U-H-E, comma, in either a V or an L, D-I in either a D or an R, and A-L-O. We can roughly guess could heave or heal, but likely heave seeing as he have, something we don't really know, and alone, which about maps out the sentence, could he have blank alone. Now my immediate thought was that it was could he have drived alone, seeing as there was an accident with a vehicle, but in the image it was clearly D-I, and the end of that seems more like a D than an R, but it's cut off so it could realistically be either or. Given it could be D-I-D, the answer could be could he have did it alone, but that sounds too stilted, and if that was the meaning, then it would have likely said could he have done it alone, so I feel like we'll have to go with the theory that is D-I-R, as the only word I could find that makes sense, assuming we aren't missing whole words here, is could he have directed it alone, but that also feels like kind of a stretch, so if you guys have ideas, comment them down below. Anyways, moving on from this, we get to I Love My Life, where Chiffon is confirmed to be mega rich, drinking champagne and dancing. This is actually the second time we've seen them drinking, as in a video we'll touch on later, seeing as this is more in line with the experiment side of the story. There's a video called Cola Song, which tells us that Chiffon loves the vodka drink Absolute A Peach, and buys 43 of them with what is presumably the company's business card. Although we haven't had a bunch of info on what Chiffon does with his free time, and thus don't know his relationship with alcohol, this kind of paints him as a bit of an alcoholic. And even though this is probably incidental and non-canon, I don't care, this is my favorite type of analysis to do, so I'm doing it. And from the size, it looks to be about a 750 milliliter. These definitely aren't travel bottles, so timesing that together, Chiffon is buying 8.5 gallons of alcohol on just this one shopping trip, or about $860 worth of hard liquor, seeing a Tito's is 20 a bottle, and that's not even one of the fancy brands. Also, a grocery store isn't typically going to buy that much stock of the same item unless it gets bought out a lot. Like, this is a whole shelf dedicated to just this vodka, which on a business standpoint would imply that Chiffon sells them out on a regular enough basis that they prepare as much stock as they can for him. And he's not just pouring a shot, he's going full bottle to lip, and gives a genuine happy look that goes past his fake smile, evil smile thing that he does as a resting face. Sir Fluff, I need to know if I need to set up a meeting. I've got Alcoholics Anonymous on standby, just let me know. Anyways, back to the video. He's drinking champagne and wine and singing about how much he loves his life, to which he seems to send a text message to none other than Latte, the person who he's been kind of knowingly taunting and mocking this whole time. This transitions smoothly to the second animation called Fuck My Life, FML, which just has Latte sad about the fact that Chiffon is living it good despite being a horrible person, seeing nobody knows that yet. Bloom is another one about how Muff is in a coma due to getting gored by a deer from that car crash, and alluding to the idea that Chiffon may have had something to do with it. This one having significantly more imagery regarding a deer in the headlights. We also get another of the imagery from earlier with the deer horns as wings, as the short ends with blood splattering out in the shape of deer horns from his back, again in the area where wings may spread. Again, a lot of the wing imagery is clearly playing at Muffin being an angel or kind of halfway dead. Though there's not much else here either. Its main purpose feels like it was to prepare and remind folks about the Muffin plot, because we're about to get the biggest amount of lore in the form of a flashback to when they were kids in Sleepwalk. Sleepwalk is where we can see more of why Latte feels the way they do about Chiffon. Basically, Muffin had this cat named Cheese that also died in a car accident, which is kind of funny if you think about it. But anyways, Cheese got ran over off screen, and they're forced to pick up the pieces, with it starting with them burying Cheese. We can also see a bunch of these different cleaners and maids about, pointing further to the idea that Hubson, the father behind LOTL CORP, that would later get passed down to Chiffon, was uber rich and distant, with them being all alone in the house and taking care of themselves outside of the people physically hired to be there and cook and clean for them. Outside of the window after they bury Cheese, Latte is unnerved by the fact that baby Chiffon is still lingering around the cat's grave. Muffin appears to be absolutely devastated by the loss of their pet, which makes sense, but that night when Latte goes to get a glass of water, he sees that outside Chiffon is out there digging them up with his bare fingers and a spoon. We cut to the next morning where it looks as though Latte gets hit on the head with a vase, something that we'll see more of later, though even here we can see a bit of Chiffon, confirming that it was likely them who pushed it over and had it hit them. This also cuts to the next night after, which we know about due to these bandages from getting hit by the vase, where Chiffon seemingly brought the cat back to life as a husk of itself, its backside still heavily deformed from being ran over. As this thing shambles over, Chiffon motions for them to be quiet or he will kill them. After that, Latte and Muffin run away from home, something that we'll also get into, and we see the cat in the window. There's many shots of all these little bits of internal organs, and the fact this kid is studying all sorts of splenchnology that he really shouldn't be at this age. Splenchnology is the study of animal viscera and organs, by the way. Fun times for the toddler. Next in Ghost, we finally get a continuation of the main timeline, as after FML, Chiffon continues trying to text and call Muffin, who smashes their phone and drives off on their motorbike to calm down. However, these two, Flame and Flare, both find this broken phone late at night and seemingly take it with them. Flame and Flare are also part of the storyline, but they don't have that much to them yet. I originally talked a bit more about them, but decided against it because they only have like 4 shorts to them, and they mostly don't matter yet. All that's really important is that Chiffon adopted these two at some point off screen, so they have Chiffon ties that probably wouldn't make Latte too happy with them having their old phone now. Following this, we get Darkside, which also doesn't have a lot other than one important thing, as we see that Latte is warming up to the idea of actually shooting Chiffon and is practicing their aim in the case that they do. Alarm Call takes us to another flashback that gives us a bunch of lore and answering some of the questions from Sleepwalk. For example, we learned that back when Latte got hit with the vase was because Chiffon was trying to hit Muffin and kill him instead, and Latte took the hit for him. This is extra interesting as before this short, I assumed that baby Chiffon may have actually liked Muffin, seeing he went through the effort of bringing back his cat the moment he died, so I originally thought that maybe Chiffon saw Muffin sad and not acting like he usually did, and wanted to fix that by bringing the cat back, not truly understanding emotion and people enough to understand why that wouldn't work. However, given this vase incident was a day before the cat was brought out, this is definitely not true. But why did Chiffon want Muffin in particular dead so much? That we still don't know. We cut sometime later to a fight out in the woods, presumably from whenever they ran away together at the end of Sleepwalk. Latte seems to be wanting to hang out with these other stereotypical bad kids, which Muffin seems to be wanting to stop. I say stereotypical bad kids because in Latte's toy house, they indirectly reference this scene with the quote, "Kind of a fucked up kid in his early teens. He changed when his older brother got into a fight with one of his bad friends and went to jail for 3 days when he was in middle school." We learn the reason that Muffin went to jail for 3 days here was because of him actually beating up that bad friend here, with us seeing the right before and the right after, with Muffin pretty clearly messed up, but obviously still being the victor. It seems like Muffin went on to do college football, could be high school technically, but with the level of beer and the after frat party, that would probably suggest college. While Latte is studying, Muffin taps on their shoulder to ask for something, but then seemingly leaves when they realize that they were studying, as it becomes clear shortly thereafter that the thing Muffin was going to ask for was a ride. But upon seeing Latte was studying and wanting them to be in peace, Muffin opted to drunk drive instead. With Muffin gored, there are a bunch of texts and calls to Latte's phone. Although it's implied initially to be from Muffin, this can't be true as he seems to faint from blood loss rather quickly from what we've seen. On the phone there seems to be 8 missed calls and 15 notifications, which a police officer not only wouldn't know to call Latte as they wouldn't have gotten a number from an unconscious body, and given Chiffon's form of mocking comes in text so far, and her intense reaction later on where she smashes the phone completely, I think these texts and phone calls are from Chiffon, which would also give us the reason why Latte seemingly knows for a fact that he was involved but can't prove it, and why Chiffon was so brazen with his mocking knowing that he knows that it was them. We also kind of know that Chiffon had to have been at the scene given the bloody photograph that he was holding away from the camera in Epoch, given this is a photo of Muffin holding baby Chiffon. I think this had to be in Muffin's pocket and the blood was from the incident. He took a memento. But that continues the big question of why did Chiffon want them dead? How did Chiffon know that Muffin was going to drunk drive? And how did he orchestrate it? If Muffin drove drunk and he hit some random deer that shish kebabed him, what's connecting the accident to Chiffon at all? And with that, that's all of the family stuff. Now we have to go back in time to take a gander at the LOTL Corporation. Here we will see a lot more of the horror and gore stuff, and see a lot more of the evil murder axolotl in its true form, and understand what he's like when he's not in public. We start with Pork Soda, the first canon video of this catfish character that's super important to the experiment side of the lore. This video just establishes the baseline of this character, that being that this character was fine, but then got some form of injury that deteriorated into an illness that deteriorated into death and undeath. This catfish is named FB, as we learn the description of Melody. In this one, they seem to be peppy, up until their eyes begin to grow bloodshot, and they seem to get sick. Their form deteriorates as they become sicker, more undead, and seems strongly implied to be because of Chiffon, from how he reacts to him touching his shoulder at the end image. We continue the catfish train with worms, where we get a much more detailed amount of lore through a lot of surprisingly important blink and you'll miss it details, especially as the description even tries to mention, surprisingly this meme has some backstory in it. In the animation, FB is seen playing with a bottle that has some form of parasite or maggot in it. Later on, they eat 2 cutlets of meat, one being a fish and the other being a cutlet, which kind of looks akin to if you took like a circular cut out of the tail or something, especially with how large it is, though it could just be a very large fish slab from a particularly large tuna. Either way, very obvious connection to how they are a fish eating fish. Over time, they start to bleed from the mouth and become concerned as their eyes grow bloodshot, and they begin to get sicker like in all the other shorts. They feel parasites wriggling within their body and in their eyes, which when we look them up, we can roughly determine that these long ones are likely parasitic roundworms, which are a common fish parasite. These parasites eventually result in FB dying, to which Chiffon's company takes his body, and he eventually becomes undead. Lastly, Chiffon extracts the original maggot back into the bottle, near identical to the one in the bottle they play with at the start. We get to the cola song I talked about earlier, but instead of focusing on vodka, we need to focus on this tan dolphin guy. At least I called him that in the notes. He's actually a Goliath tigerfish according to the Toy House. This is Monty, and they've actually appeared a handful of times, including in the last Worms video, but he hasn't had much of a massive role or appearance. From here they show their character briefly as a stoic bodyguard that does what Chiffon wants, but more interesting is the fact that their eyes kinda look identical to when FB got infected with whatever they got going on, which we'll go more in depth with later on in Psycho Killer when we see more of him. Dimension is another important one, as we see FB is in a cage down in the experiment labs Chiffon runs, though today their cage is unlocked, so despite hesitating, they decide to go make a run for it. It seems like they aren't the only ones trying to escape, as they find this drugged up creature who killed one of the doctors, and so they escape together, which makes him more confident. Chiffon seems to have been waiting for them, however, and FB's plan goes awry with a flick of a switch, as it turns out that they can instantly control this creature FB brought with them, and so they are recaptured as fast as they left. Though strangely, the door is still unlocked, implying another escape attempt, though also implying that Chiffon is doing this for fun, messing with him by letting him almost escape before ruining it and throwing him back at the last second. Especially hinted at by the fact that Chiffon was waiting for them, knew the exact moment they'd reach this room, and also knew that they'd be bringing this creature with them. This creature doesn't have a page on the Toy House and is never seen again, so unfortunately we don't know anything about this or the specifics, but we do know that there are definitely some odd shenanigans going on with debatable legality. In HP, we get a bit more lore that will be covered further too, though something interesting that I noticed, we see that FB was bitten by something, an injury that back in the Worms video seemed to be a bear trap, but this is clearly a bite underneath it, as the bear trap from earlier is clearly one-pronged if you look at it, while their injuries seem to have two separate areas, especially aided by the fact that they get sick again, as well as something else. Other than Monty, there's another guy that I haven't really talked about named Peril, who's a black mamba, not an eel. I thought he was an eel for an embarrassingly long time. In my defense, there are a lot of fishy folk. At the end of the animation, it seems to have been nice to FB. However, back in Worms, they show up when FB says nobody likes me, which would indicate that after they started getting especially sick and died before becoming an undead experiment, Peril becomes afraid and avoidant of them, seemingly sad or worried. Given the bear traps, it seems like Monty was likely the one to use the bear traps on them. It makes me wonder if FB was somehow injured and entering the facility for help, such as, say, the bear trap they had in the Worms video prior to ingesting the worm and getting sick. It isn't too far-fetched to enter a medical lab if you think you are in dire need of medical assistance. However, unfortunately, FB got infected either by getting bit by something or eating something, hence the parasites. But also hence why our Snaky Boy didn't think of anything at first, helped them up until they started showing signs, and became an experiment themselves. Next up, we get the other side of HP from Peril's perspective, in what is logical, in that after they helped FB, they seem to feel conflicted. It also becomes clear that this infection might be something Chiffon can control, as both here and in Pork Soda, we see this spiral eye thing that generally is associated with brainwashing. We know that Chiffon can control some of the experiments from dimensions, but FB is generally normal up until midway through the video. After a while, they show signs of feralness, with gnashing teeth and with the snake's lab coat being covered in blood and them crying at the end. I wonder if this sickness isn't the thing that killed FB, but instead Chiffon setting FB off and forcing quote-unquote one of his men's hand. Though what's even more interesting is that we never see those bloodshot eyes that are more typical of the sickness, which makes me wonder if when we see them with the spiral eyes, that is them having the bloodshot eyes. And whenever we see a character with bloodshot eyes, they're infected and could be controlled with a flick of a button should Chiffon want to. Aiding in this spiral theory, we can also see in the old Pork Soda video, the only other time FB seems violent is at the 028 mark, with these red spiral eyes that feel evil and hungry right before that long spiral zoom. And we also know that one of his other minions are bloodshot, so maybe he's not a minion or bodyguard by exact choice. Maybe he's infected and being controlled. Doctor also ends up supporting this earlier idea that FB may have been brought in seeking help, as they seem to get help for what is presumably the bear trap wound on their hand. There's also some other weird stuff that seems to indicate otherwise, namely this diagnosis sheet, which shows us an explosion with a car, something to do with eyes, and then mental anguish. We know the infection has to do with eyes, but the car crash is definitely new. But also a car crash wouldn't just hurt your arm and nothing else, like the bear trap we know FB got bit by around the same spot would have. However, after leaving, there seems to be an image towards the end that shows them getting surgery while looking very dead, which likely lines up with worms where they end up getting cut open to remove the parasite that they ate. And in this short, we see Peril give something to FB, and he generally shows a lot of guilt towards whatever happened with FB. It seems to pretty clearly imply that Peril was probably the one to give FB the disease, whether knowingly or not. Which takes us to my favorite theory video so far, Pumpkin Song. We see as Chiffon meets FB while they're exploring around, and while they initially invite them in, Chiffon ends up progressively scaring FB throughout the animation. However, there are a lot of mini details here that are pretty important. Of course, we see the spiral eye motif with FB again, which we've seen several times by this point, though this one is while he is not undead, and I don't think he's infected here either. We can see various notes in the background which, although we can't read, seems to be near identical from the types of notes we found in Sleepwalk from when he was a baby. But the main interesting thing has to do with the rat that shows up constantly in this short in particular. The rat scene in here is very interesting given the only other animation they appear in was the first ever animation that showed Chiffon as an evil psycho-scientist, with the super early short, Hot Milk. Most of the animation is just Chiffon sitting there or bouncing like the other animation memes. However, we see glimpses of him having dissected a particularly large rat. It may not be the same one in Pumpkin Song, given this one is alive and dies in a different manner. However, the callback here is interesting. Chiffon has this rat in a jar the whole time, which them being in a jar also gives parallels to the worm in the jar from Worms once again. There's this creepy claymation rat anatomy skeleton that's shown for a bit. After a short bit, he shows the rat having died in the jar and being thoroughly de-eyed, which causes FB to run away afraid, and when they leave, Chiffon plucks it limp out of the jar, and with the line, "Fall asleep and I'll feed you to my cat," he tosses it in the air, and we pretty clearly see the rat turn into the soup that FB later eats, representing Chiffon infecting the meal, likely with whatever parasite he got in Worms. Extra neat given FB is a catfish, and the line is "I'll feed you to my cat," and the infected item being a dead rat, rats being a notorious cat thing, and Chiffon later forcing them into a cat and mouse game in Dimensions. Oh yeah, and also he's brought back dead cats before. And given Peril gives this meal to FB, this is likely what Peril regrets and blames on himself, because he likely had no idea the food got infected. In the description, we see the text, "I think I saw a weird man at the basement floor," which means Peril doesn't know that it was his boss that FB is talking about and was freaked out about. So he had no reason to suspect anything. This goes further in A Stranger, where we learn how FB got here. In the description, we see, "He just wanted to see the world. Now the only thing he wants is to go back home," which is clear with the several shots we see of FB leaving the ocean, being astounded by the city lights, and having a good time. We get this shot of a clearly off-limits area with two signs, likely going to the labs, though it has an interesting nod to this with a warning sign for a bear trap, which is what FB got hit with, and a warning sign for deer, which we know Chiffon had something to do with the one putting Muffin in a coma. It seems as though the theory about them getting hurt by a bear trap and seeking help is true, as we see them with a clear bear trap wound. However, you can clearly see FB's injury only has one prong again. This larger prong was likely from the bear trap we saw back in Worms, but again, no second bite from something else like what we saw earlier. So where did the second bite we see later come from? Sometime after though, there was some kind of car crash that happened, which we see a quick glimpse of at 051, which from what we know so far, the best guess I have is that the initial injury with the bear trap and the later injury with the car are two separate injuries separated by a lot more than what is implied here. Seeing we know that Peril treats FB and tries to help them, FB gets infected and dies sometime later, I think that after being fixed up, they were allowed to leave, but because of the infection, Chiffon was able to use that to put them into that feral brainwashy state we've seen, and make them get hit by Peril, killing them, thus forcing FB to stay as an experiment due to having died, and also preventing Peril from doing anything even if they feel like what is happening in the labs is wrong, because he's the reason FB died initially. Their freedom would at best mean that he gets in trouble for vehicular manslaughter, and at worst, if the infection is what's keeping them alive in their undeath, it could result in FB fully dying should they leave the labs. Chiffon is preparing in the case that Peril realizes what's up. It's preemptive emotional blackmail. And with several of the other shorts, namely Doctor, there's also an implication of Peril being romantically interested in or crushing on FB, which also likely plays a part in both him having brought them here and making meals for them and tending to them, but also the later guilt and the want to keep them here. Q&A gives us a bunch of mini confirmations straight from the horse's mouth, or axolotl's mouth, because it's from Chiffon, the token of honesty and complete non-psychopathic innocence. We learn that Chiffon is 23 and the CEO of LOTL CORP, which I told you earlier. We learn that LOTL CORP is a corporation and is a medicine brand that aims to create medicine that is accessible for all, which given the whole disease that may or may not brainwash people thing, definitely isn't foreboding at all. Chiffon's favorite activity is studying and learning new things, which is definitely what we saw back with Sleepwalk. Chiffon is small because of a birth defect. Chiffon supports the LGBT community, is apparently pan. When asked thoughts on Muffin, they say that they had potential, but it's a shame what happened to him. Chiffon apparently knew Peril since their college days, and that's about it for the semi-important details. We also get Psycho Killer as a short, though it's basically just a summary of a bunch of the main things for those who haven't watched all the shorts. Namely that Chiffon is not as he seems, that there's a bunch of weird undead stuff going on, that he had something to do with Muffin's death and how Latte is trying to figure all that out, and that FB is trying to escape the facility. There are some mini background things that we see though, like a new newspaper regarding the whole Muffin Chiffon conspiracy that says first son impaled, and we get a shot of Monty, Chiffon's bodyguard, cut open with them looking at their insides rather calmly, which seems to indicate that Monty is canonically one of the undead, hence his unwavering loyalty to Chiffon. Speaking of, in IBI TBT, we hit back to our regularly scheduled escape attempt. In this one, upon seeing Chiffon, they immediately go in for the kill, only to get got by Monty, absolutely biting into their non-existent torso. Throughout this animation, Chiffon taunts them by goading them, asking them to tell them what's the holdup, while he's being pinned by Monty's teeth, preventing them from truly attacking Chiffon. When Chiffon makes a motion towards them, FB tries to bite them again, which causes Chiffon to decide they're done playing, and Monty moves them over to crack open their skull. Though given they appear perfectly fine in their cell again, it seems like the illness keeping the undead alive is also causing them to regenerate to the point of their death, interestingly enough. Which makes sense given we know the regeneration of this caliber does exist, as in the Q&A video as well as again in the Toy House pages, it's confirmed that all axolotls in this universe hold this property. And given back in Sleepwalk it's confirmed that he's been doing this since he was toddling and brought a dead cat back, it makes sense that whatever this is had to be something he could discover at that young of an age. And I don't think toddler baby Chiffon can just access whatever medical equipment they want, even if his father was the original CEO. So whatever the illness is, it likely has to do with axolotls or their DNA, and the ability to regenerate so rapidly, something that he may be passing on to these other people and using to control them. Otherwise, it would be impossible for Chiffon to find it so early, or impossible for FB to reconstitute his skull so well. Anyways, with that, we are on to the final two videos. Though Banami, one of the two, doesn't actually have too much to it other than showcasing how much Peril is becoming more afraid of Chiffon, and is starting to question working for him due to his great guilt over FB, and Chiffon's extreme nonchalance about it. Something that is absolutely hammered in with the final animation as of writing, Jeepers Creepers. Here we see Peril doing research of some kind after hours, where thanks to their guilt, they are incredibly on edge. We see glimpses of FB down the hall, however the monster in question actually ends up being Chiffon down the hall, representing his shifting ideology here, and despite the fact that FB is the monster or infected zombie thing, it's Chiffon that is the actual thing to be afraid of, and how Peril is starting to lack trust in Chiffon because he's noticing there's something off about him. But his guilt about FB, and possibly history with Chiffon, is keeping him here regardless. There's also the fact that at the end of the video, we know Peril is here at 4 AM, and given Chiffon is telling them to go home, there's a good chance that Peril is working overtime here, with what we can assume is also because of his guilt. Peril is trying to figure out a way to help FB or cure him or something to fix what he believes that he has done, which is about where things end for now. Though this also brings us to the obligatory theory section, because there are a lot of implications and possibilities for what's going to happen. See, back with the family section, we know for certain that Muffin died in a car accident with a deer, and that Chiffon is 100% involved or caused some part of that. But what we don't know is 1, how'd he do it? 2, why did he do it? And number 3, what did he do specifically? We know Chiffon isn't past doing unethical and borderline torturous things, and we know he doesn't care much for people outside of their use case, but to kill someone or set up their murder is quite the effort. And we know he's wanted to since they were babies. What with the vase? We have a few ideas as to how, but I want to tackle the why first. As for it to be something he wants to do even that young, it had to be something early on. And given some of the newspapers we can see from Latte's boards, as well as the fact that Hubson was the CEO of the successful company since their births, I noticed that some of the newspapers specifically reference 2 things. In Monster, we get a cut-off newspaper saying, LOTL CORP, Hubson's 3rd son gets the business. And in the summary video Psycho Killer, we can read first son impaled. And from what we know of Muffin when he was alive, although he was a himbo type character, he was well loved and considered very charismatic. And given he was the firstborn and the constant reference to the firstborn and the thirdborn and whatever, it's likely that of anyone to inherit it or be given the business, it was going to be him. Latte doesn't seem like the type that would be interested in being a CEO or a businessman, and Chiffon, as we know, was very interested in biology at a young age, meaning if he wanted to continue it when he was older, his best bet would be being that CEO. And if he wants to do that, that could be the reason why Chiffon has had it out for him since he was like 4. It's a usurper plot. Unless we get more information where we see Muffin and Chiffon interacting, seeing as we only ever see Muffin and Latte mostly, this is the only answer we have as of right now until we get more information as to their relationship before the accident. As for how, I actually have two different theories, though one is more likely the angle Fluff is going with than the other. My first theory, and the one that I initially thought, was that the car crash really did have nothing to do with Chiffon, but the coma was. Mainly because of a quote you can find once again on the Toy House page. On Muffins, there's a line about the coma that reads, "The doctors say most of his organs should be working now, even for his slower growth abilities, but he still hasn't woken up." And this combined with Chiffon's medical knowledge, I thought that maybe Chiffon pulled some strings to make sure that Muffin didn't wake up from the hospital. That Chiffon did something using his knowledge of the body to cause the coma and keep him practically vegetative during his visit that we see at the end of Epoch with the photo. I figured that Chiffon maybe messed with Muffin's ability to recover, and that was that. But if that's true, then that doesn't explain Alarm Call very well, as that would mean somebody else called, not Chiffon. That would remove the explanation as to why Latte thinks it's him, and would also mean Chiffon doesn't have a reason to visit the scene, which makes how they got this photo its own conundrum. So if that's not it, what is? Well, in one of the videos we can clearly see that the deer is shown to have these swirly eyes, the same swirly eyes that we keep seeing with FB. You know, FB, the one that also got hit with a car and died. We also see in that Psycho Killer video an image of the deer with what looks to be a gash in their forehead. We know this image would have to portray pre-crash, as they don't have any of the injuries from the window, just the head. And this injury doesn't look natural. You'd expect a bullet hole, but this is clearly a gash that goes deeply into the skull. And in some of LOTL Corp's videos, including Jeepers Creepers, we see lots of brain scans and brains in jars and the like, which implies that this illness has something to do with the brain, which we already know from the whole brainwashing thing. And to top it off, the research site, in the video where FB is taken to the lab by Peril, has signs warning of deer, meaning deer are easily accessible. Chiffon got a deer infected and had it charge at Muffin's car, which is how he got gored. Though obviously there's still the big question mark of how did Chiffon know that Muffin would be on the road that day in the area that his deer was, and then how did he know that Muffin would be drunk to then pass it off that way? If he even knew that. I guess it would have looked incidental regardless, so maybe him having drank that night was a coincidence that he only learned later, but knowing how Chiffon enjoys watching others suffer, it would make sense why he would then have been on the scene to get the photo as a memento, and be the one to call Latte so she knows but can't prove it. And if this is really how he did it, then I think this is what he was trying to do with FB, just in the reverse. He was trying to put Peril in a situation where he was forced to kill FB to teach him a lesson, so Peril doesn't risk his secret unethical stuff by bringing random hurt people in. And after the fact, you can see it by how he messes with him. Chiffon is taunting Peril, or at least starting to, and Peril is starting to realize a side to Chiffon that he didn't see in college. But even if he realizes it, Chiffon is the CEO of a top medical company holding ultimate power over the entire industry. Where Peril, even if he did learn the truth and get the strength to leave or try to help FB escape, Peril would likely be blackmailed for the car accident that caused FB's death, or be blacklisted from the industry as a whole, making his degree useless, and a job impossible. Not to mention how unlikely it is that he could successfully leak or show anything without Chiffon finding a way to dodge it like he had in other situations. Either way though, this is a series that is very interesting and has some really cool moments. As I said earlier, this has been a thing for 8 whole years, but I still think I pieced it together alright, all things considered. As to whether I got anything wrong or if anything was retconned or if my theory will end up being correct, only time will tell. Until then though, that's all I have for you. Leave your tip at the door, my friends, and I'll see you around. Bye!